You're making a quilt for a colourblind person, but you're a bit worried that they might only be able to see one big blob of colour. Or have you got some clever secondary pattern that's made using quarter, square, triangle, snowballs, but you're worried that the effect's going to be lost? Well, don't worry. In this video, I am going to be talking about some specific strategies and ideas and things not to do when you're making a quilt for a colourblind person. And I have a free download of colourblind accessible quilt colour schemes that's going to help you. So make sure you stick around to the end. Hi, my name is Tom and I am the Colourblind Quilter. I am on a journey to become a better quilter and I am sharing my experiences along the way. So let's just recap, okay? This is part 4 in the series. So far, we have talked about colourblindness and what it is. We have discovered that I am red-green colourblind, and then I've told you some of the resources and strategies that I use to get around it, to learn to cope with being colourblind and quilting. So in today's video, I want to give you some tips and strategies that you can use to successfully make a quilt for a colourblind person. Things that you can take away and successfully use them to make a quilt that they're going to love. The first idea I have is it's helpful to know what type of colourblindness the person has. Now the chances are they're red and green colourblind because that is the most common form of colourblindness in the world, but it's still worth finding out. They could have a really mild red or green weakness, or they could have a really strong green weakness. If it's a weakness, then it will be a little bit easier for you to pick the colours, whereas if it's a complete blindness to colour, then it's going to be much harder for you to choose the colours, and you're going to have to pick carefully to avoid certain colour combinations. If this is not a surprise, as in the person knows you're making the quilt for them, then I think the best piece of advice I can give you is ask, what is their favourite colour? What are their favourite colours? Is there a particular colour that they don't like? Are there any particular colours that they like together? Chances are they'll be able to say to you, I like X colour, or I like X and Y and C, and then that will give you a great foundation to go from. So if it is a surprise, here are some ideas for ways that you can find out. You can try looking at the clothes that they wear and look for any patterns. I tend to stick to the colours that I like. I have orange and yellow t-shirts. I have dark jeans because I know that they go together. Another way is to look at their house. What's their interior decor like? Is there a colour in particular that they seem to have a lot of in their house, in their bedroom, in their living room? That can give you ideas. Particularly if you're making a quilt for their living room, you know, if they have a teal decorated living room, then that can be a great way to figure out what colours you should be using. Another idea, if it's a surprise, ask a family member, ask a parent, ask a sibling, ask a partner, wife, husband. There are things that you can do to ask to find out what the person likes. Now this is the topic. Whoa, we could talk about this for years. So I'm just going to try and condense this down. So first, start with the dominant colour of the quilt, i.e. the colour that fills the biggest area of the quilt. And that's not the background colour, it is a colour, okay? So colours are not normally the problem for colourblind people. It's shades and values of colour. So when we're looking at tints of colours, values of colours, and shades of colours, that's where we get into difficulty. When these are too close together in a quilt, that can be when it's really difficult to differentiate, and so therefore the person stops seeing two colours and starts to just see one block of colour. And when there's a secondary pattern that relies on contrast between two colours, the effect is lost. So you want to pull colours, lots of contrast between the two, because then it'll be very easy for them to differentiate between it. I'm red-green colourblind. This quilt over here, this colour is pomegranate, so it's a pinky red. I can see very clearly because there's lots of contrast between the pinky red and the gold orange and the blue. Those three colours have lots of contrast between them, and I can see that very clearly. So high value, low values together, and that makes it very easy for the person to see the difference between the two. When adding the colours around this dominant colour, go for bright, highly saturated versions of the colour. As I've mentioned, shades in the middle ground are much harder. Look for very saturated versions of those colours. Green and red, green and black, blue and purple, light green and yellow, light pink and grey, blue and grey, green and black, dark red and black. That might seem like a long list of colours, and it is, because remember, colourblind people, they may be red-green colourblind, but they can get all the other colours muddled up depending on how those colours are composed. Those are some common colours to avoid. But we want to make this as accessible as possible, so try and avoid putting those colour combos together, touching, if possible. Split them up, put them with background in between them or other ends of blocks. So I touched on pattern fabrics and why I don't really work with them, and not all colorblind people will be the same. I have seen colorblind quilters that use pattern fabrics quite happily and are fine with them, and I've seen others that don't, that just stick to solids. So I would use them carefully, really dense, really packed pattern fabrics with lots of variation of colors and close together shade where the pattern relies on shadows to create outlines and depth. Probably not going to be a good idea. If you want to be ultra modern, you could try a monochromatic color scheme, which is basically a quilt all in one color, and you just pick various shades of color. Now that can be so effective, and this image of this quilt is a monochromatic quilt, and it's beautiful, and there's lots of contrast between it because they've picked the shades well. So that can be a great option, particularly if they tell you their favorite color is blue. Make a blue monochromatic quilt and use lots of shades that are far apart so that they get really nice contrast. I've also alluded to this as well, but sometimes simpler is better, and so a navy and orange color scheme would be amazing for me. And navy and orange is actually a very popular colorblind combo because they're very accessible colors for colorblind people. It's very easy to see them. Keep it simple. It doesn't mean that you have to do a basic quilt design, just color it simply. And you know, some of the most effective quilt patterns are just two colors or a negative space where they use a dark background and a light color to create the pattern. So they can be amazing. If you are making a quilt that has a secondary pattern, and these are very popular, I love secondary patterns. It's amazing when you see it pop out and then you can see all the different combos of patterns going on in there. Think about the colors that are forming those secondary patterns, because if you put two shades of two colors together, that secondary pattern will be lost for a colorblind person when they cannot differentiate between the two colors. So if your secondary pattern relies on a contrast, make sure that you color these accordingly. Navy and orange together in the secondary pattern would contrast very well, but a certain shade of red and a certain shade of green, it's going to be lost. You could use colorblind friendly color palettes to make your quilt, and it just so happens that there's a download in the description that you can get for free that you can use to color your quilts. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit. If you use digital design software, the chances are that the software is capable of exporting an image. So when you've designed your quilt and you've colored it, export that as a JPEG or a PNG file, and you can very easily take that picture and you can convert it to black and white, and you can look at the contrast beside the colors. People say put your fabrics in the order you're going to use them and then take a black and white picture, look at it in black and white and just see, is there contrast? Is there enough contrast? When I look at this quilt in black and white, there's not enough contrast between these greys. So it can be a little bit confusing for somebody that has a stronger form of color blindness. If you're going to use reds, look for things like Christmas red, magenta, and they can be easier to see. So there's a link down in the description to a website called Cobblist, and what you can do is you can upload your picture and it will simulate the different types of color blindness so that you can see how the quilt will look to the type that your person you're making it has. If in doubt, ask another person that's colorblind. What do you think of this? Does this look okay to you? Are there areas that you can't tell that there's two colors there? How is the visual look of this to you? And if you don't know somebody that's colorblind, there are colorblind forums on the internet where you can ask advice. There are Reddit threads and things like that where you can go and you can ask colorblind people what they think. And this is actually something that I do myself. I go and ask other colorblind people, what do you think of this quilt color scheme? What do you think of this fabric pool? Does that look okay? Are those colors together, do they work? And it's great. So, you know, if you do know somebody, ask them. If not, take to the internet. Now, I do have a free download, as I've probably said 900 times during this video, that's in the description that you can download. And this is a collection of color palettes. And what I've done is I've used primary and secondary colors as the dominant color in these. So there are palettes for red, green, yellow, blue, orange, and navy in there. And what you find is that there is two-tone palettes, so the dominant color plus another palette, and then there are 5 color palettes. And there's a collection for each one. Some have more where they're easier colors, and some have just 1 or 2 where there are slightly harder colors for colorblind people. So I have taken these colors and I've used some of the tools that I've been mentioning, looking for contrast, looking for things that are too close together. I've viewed them through colorblind simulators. I've checked them, of course, myself with my own eyes. I have consulted with other colorblind quilters to get their feedback and opinions, and I've asked people that have slightly worse colorblindness than I do to check them. And I've used tools that we would use in the website world that can take take a color palette and can analyze it and say these shades are too close together to be accessible for a colorblind person. So when I say colorblind safe, what we mean is there's lots of contrast in these palettes. There's no colors that are too close together. Somebody that's colorblind might look at them and they may not necessarily be able to tell you what color they are. You know, they may look at red and say they see green or vice versa, but there's enough in there that they can say, I can see that there's 5 colors. There's enough contrast, there's enough saturation in the colors for them to be able to tell that there are different colors there. And what you can do with these is you can take them and then you can use them in your quilt. So when you look at the document, what you'll see is that all these little swatch cards are basically Kona fabrics, and these are all using Kona solids, and these are the pictures from the manufacturer's website. So these are their representations of the fabric. These are not computer generated swatches. These are physical photos that the manufacturer has taken of the colors. So they're probably as close to the colors as we'll get. You'll find the code and the name of the color. You'll also see in the download that there are some example quilts that I have colored using these patterns. And I've done this so that you can see how they work. And all the colors are labeled so you can see where they go. And what I would encourage you to do is to take a picture of them and look at them in black and white and see how they contrast and how I've put them together. So check out that download in the description below and let me know what you think of it. So there you have it. Those are my tips and strategies on how to make a quilt for a colorblind person. I hope taking these things into consideration can help you with some ideas for making quilts for your family or friends who may be colorblind. Now, if you have a question about colorblindness or being a colorblind quilter, then leave me a comment below, because I am going to do a follow-up Q&A video and I'm going to answer as many of these questions as I can. And this is the 4th part of this series, and I really do hope that you're finding it helpful. In the final part of this series, I'm working on tips specifically for colorblind quilters and creators on how to manage and how to cope with colors when you're working on your project. So if you know somebody that's a colorblind quilter like me, or they're a knitter or a crocheter or a crafter, then why not share this with them so that they can see the videos and get some ideas. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. That will really help me out. And don't forget to subscribe and then click the bell so you'll get notified when the next video comes out. I'll link to the playlist for all these videos, so if you've missed any of these videos, you can watch them all again. You can find me on Instagram, Pinterest and Facebook at The Colourblind Quilter, or you can check out my website, thecolourblindquilter.com. So take care, and I'll see you next time.